So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll start. And I think everybody who should be here is here now. And we'll begin. All right, so today's talk is on the triad of the tree of life, and particularly the triad of becoming, which involves both the wisdom, understanding, and the crown, which is Kete. And we've come from the triad of ego, which is below, that triangle below that you see on the figure, to the triad of love, to the triad of becoming, which the yogis and the Buddhists would call the triad of enlightenment, self-realization. But the ancestors, and some of you that are not familiar with these talks, anytime there's a quote, or it sounds really profound, it's not coming from me, it's coming from the ancestors, who are a conglomeration of different cultures and traditions. So in reality, the yogis would call this enlightenment, self-realization, what the oneness experience, a unity consciousness. Kabbalah in the Tree of Life calls it unity. Combining with the fact that we are made in the image of the divine, we are a tiny spark of divine intelligence, and we have some of the capacity of that divine intelligence. Now, there's a little blue sphere there in between wisdom and understanding, and that's a separate energy center. It differs from the other 10 so-called spherot or energy centers in that it's not connected to any of the 22 pathways that you see. So if you look, the 22 pathways telling us that this is a dynamic situation. It's not static. At any one time, you can fall down the ladder into one of the lower triads. For those who want to catch up on the lower triads, they are online. Trevor recorded them, put them online at davidcumes.com, so you can sort of go back and reverse engineer if you like, or instead of going from bottom to top, you can go from top to bottom. The three principles of the triad of becoming are very similar to the yoga principles of the chakras. If you see it on the right-hand side, the chakra of creative expression, which is the way we express ourselves, which is more like the understanding on the tree of life. The chakra of the third eye, which is intuitive wisdom, which is more similar to wisdom itself on the tree. And then the crown, Kete on the tree, which is the enlightenment crown. So the right side expands, the right side of the tree expands, and the left side of the tree contracts or restrains. So these two polarities that are going on at any one time, and we're going to talk about those polarities. So I think I'll just say one other thing, is that the right side is more of a love vibration and the left is more of a fear vibration. And the love is more connected to what ancestors call spacious mind, big mind, Buddha mind, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And the other side, the understanding, is more connected to the mind, the monkey mind, and what they call the narrow mind, which is more about our survival. So let's see. This is our menu for today. So we're going to deal with imagination, with faith, which is a separate energy center. That's that little blue line you see, that's about faith. It's called Da'at, which is inner knowing. It comes from grace. When you have faith, magical things can happen. We're going to talk about truth. We're going to talk about the wisdom side, which incorporates belief, hope, trust, surrender. And this leads us to what we call knowing and seeing things you cannot know, seeing things you cannot see, which is the wisdom side. And this should lead to virtue, holiness, and heartfeltness, or love, or feeling, because without the love, you can't get to Keta. So these are all part of wisdom. Understanding is more about information, knowledge, which is where we biased with our education system. Mostly people are just focusing on the cognitive, which is a big mistake. And then at the end of the talk, we'll be talking about balancing the polarity of the two limbs of the tree, and finally a little bit about the tricksters or the dark forces that are there to sabotage us and prevent us from getting there. So we're going to start off with imagination, which is about making the existent, the non-existent, existent. And what Buber said was to play in the exaltation of the possible. The ancestors say that to think like God is to think with imagination. So we have some imaginative capacity similar to the Great Spirit. And they also say imagination is the elixir of God running through the universe. If you don't like the word God, use infinite intelligence, the field, doesn't matter. But there's some force out there that some people can't identify with. It's the elixir of God running through the universe. It's more than positive thinking. These imaginings help co-create with the divine. The divine actually wants a personal relationship with all of us, but it only happens when you're in that triad of becoming. It doesn't happen too much when you're down below. Paint the picture of your life by imagining. And they also go on to say what cannot be imagined cannot be fulfilled. So it all begins in the imagination. So if you look at the tree of life and the creation, it was formed in 4 distinct stages of manifestation: emanation, creation, formation, and actualization. And that sounds very heady, but emanation comes from imagination. It comes from nothingness. It comes from wisdom. And in the beginning was the word. So it was the intention to create the universe. Then came the creation, which is the plan, the blueprint. And the plan and the blueprint is kind of like the architect that you ask to design a building. He imagines what he wants, and then he writes it down in a plan. So it's both the wisdom side and the understanding side. You need both. So formation and creation is part of the wisdom and the understanding part. The imagination comes from beyond the wisdom, comes from the field, from the infinite, from the creator, that part of us made in the image of the divine. Formation is the next 6 sphirot, the next 6 energy centers, which in your sense, if you think about it, there was the creation, there was the Big Bang, there was a massive explosion when the Great Spirit insinuated her presence into this chaotic space. And this created the elements, which eventually over billions of years formed what we have now, which is structure and order that we are messing up seriously. So those are the next 6 sphirot, below wisdom and understanding. And finally, there's actualization, where it gets made, where the building gets made, where your plan gets created, which is us here on earth in what's called the kingdom. We live out our life, we live out our destiny, we live out our spiritual transformation. So everything begins with the word, with the intention. Yeats said, people who lean on logic, philosophy, and rational exposition end by starving the best part of the mind, imagination and intuition. And that's what our education system has done to us. That's why you'll see the primal mind is much more developed in some ways than we are. We're very good at technology, but we're not so good at anything else. You think of the artists, the musicians, and the poets, they could go where words cannot take you. And we're talking about wordless information. So wisdom arises out of nothing. The Creator made something out of nothing. We are able to make something out of something else. And it starts in the emanation with the imagination. And then it begins in the creation, which is what's called non-verbal thought. It's spacious mind. It's big mind. Einstein said that his cognitive abilities meant less to him than his imaginative and his fantasy abilities. He said those were much more important to him. So in reality, non-verbal thought, non-verbal spacious mind is flowing, it's formless. The property of it, the element is water. It's undifferentiated thought. It doesn't make any sense. You can't, there's no logic to it. But that's where it begins. And Einstein had both those abilities. He had the imaginative capacity to think of what he wanted to understand the mind of God. And then he also had the understanding in mathematics to put it down in paper and make things happen. Some of them fantastic, some of them not so fantastic. So we can mess things up pretty badly. The ancestors say, as you think it, so it can be. As you imagine, bless you, as you imagine and believe it, so it will be. Think on it, believe in it, because those are the two things that mess us up. So that's how we make something out of something else with capacity of the imagination. That's that little part of us, that microcosmic part of us that's kind of made in the image of the divine. This is very different, of course, to verbal, narrow mind thought, which is where we spend most of our time in understanding. So imagination, this requires courage. Faith, belief, hope, trust, surrender requires a lot of courage because you're believing in something that's not apparent, as opposed to doubt, denial, and disbelief. Now, all these things, they're sort of nuances of the same word. You kind of think, well, what's the difference between them? But they're really important because we have to clarify them in order to really get into the triad of becoming. So the ancestors give a lot of teachings on the differences, the nuances of these different words. They're subtly different, and they all are very powerful. So if you want to manifest something, these are the phases that you manifest through. Intention, attention to detail, action, affirmation. And if you can connect with the field, and that's your guides, your ancestors, the creator of the field, most of which is completely unknowable. If you can create with the field, your creation is going to be much more possible, much more powerful, much more potential. So it starts with intention, and the more the will, the more the passion, the more they're going to respond from the field. And then attention to detail. They want to know what you want, and that happens in your imagination. If you can imagine it, it's great. If you can't, then you visualize it, which is fine. They want the context of your imagination, of your intention, because free will is the cosmic law. You can't say, help me with my life. You have to tell them the context of what you want help for, and then they can come and they will attend to the details. So you give them the context, they attend to the details. Then you take action, which should be detailed oriented. We have to do our own due diligence. We can't expect the field to do it for us. God helps those who help themselves, but we have to start. And then there's affirmation. Affirmation is because free will is in the present moment on the other side in the field. The ancestors, your guides, are living in a non-space-time reality. So that in reality, what is happening is they want to know you want it today, do you want it tomorrow, do you want it next month? So affirmation is really important. You've got to maintain, sustain. You don't always have to have the full imagination. You could even have a mantra or something where you can sort of express in that sentence or a few sentences what you want, but keep affirming, because remember, they are responding to your free will in that present moment, even though we live in a time space. So affirmation is really important. The ringer is, and this is all these principles you can find if you go to a self-help thing. And the problem with the self-help thing, they're not invoking help from the field. That's the one caveat. The other thing is the faith, the belief, and the feeling. You have to feel it in your bones. We are all entitled to self-transformation, spiritual transformation. We are all entitled to have health and to heal and to cure, but we're not all entitled to have a Maserati or an own private island, in the Bahamas. So if you are the kind of person who can really believe that you are, it's going to happen. But most of us, my subconscious goes, Dave, what's wrong with the Chevy? It's not going to happen. So you've got to have faith, belief, and feel it in your bones for it to happen. And the big thing at the end is non-attachment to the outcome. You put your attention into the field in detail. You release completely from any outcome, and you let the universe, the field, handle the details. And if you can get yourself out of the way, which is difficult if you're sort of egocentric, if you get yourself out of the way and you make it for the greater good for somebody else, it's going to have more traction from the field, because they don't want you doing stuff for yourself. They'll attend to your needs, but they won't attend to the island in the Bahamas. They'll attend to your livelihood, but nothing else. They just want you to get to the triad of becoming. So don't forget about the field. It's really important. Faith, that's the little blue sphere that you see. It's not a true sphere, but this is an inner knowing, and it's a complete faith that something is going to happen, very hard for most of us to have. The Talmud says faith is a very strong thing. And if a person has a faith and simplicity that does not rationalize, Jesus said, blessed are the meek. If you're meek, you don't rationalize, you don't exclude things, things can happen for you. She or he will be found worthy of reaching the rung of grace, which is this other sphere of power that you have up there at the top. which is even higher than that of holy wisdom. So this levels the playing field. You can be a bushman in the Kalahari and you can't read and write, but you can get into advanced stages of consciousness. And they do. Some of them, they go out into the field and they trance dance. I've got a DVD on my website if you want to watch it. And they discourse with their ancestors. They tell them what to do, where to hunt, and who's sick and who they need to attend to. Some of them say, we saw the Great Spirit. We made ourselves very small. So they liken to like advanced yogis, Buddhists, Kabbalists, who never see the Great Spirit, but they can see an anthropomorphic version of the Great Spirit. So this is levels the playing field. The fact is that if you're not simple, it's actually harder for us to get into the field and to get to the triad because there are too many things that we doubt and get in the way. So this is a very important thing because you get direct access with faith. So faith, just to make sure clear what it's about, there's going to be a lot of repetition here because there's a lot of information. So faith is no mention of impossibility. It's also involved with the placebo effect. If you can have complete faith, the placebo effect can be 100%. We see that in spontaneous remissions of deadly diseases that have defied the best of what Western medicine has to offer. And usually the ingredient is faith. It's kind of like Jung was asked, do you believe in God? He said, I don't believe in God. I know there's a God, period. It's a knowing, you can't rationalize it. It's just something you know. Not knowing what cannot be done. That's what faith is. Making the non-existent existent. And decree, if you can make a decree like in this case Jung does, then that's faith. You have no doubt. It's absolutely, I just don't question it. The measure of your faith is the only limit to realizing God's potential for you. That's the phrase that gets the Bushmen there. They know how to get there. They can get there. You don't have to come to class. You just have to be nature-bound and be a Bushman. We have to come to class and learn about it. So this is from Henry Ford, who was, sort of the materialistic version of this, and he did a lot of great stuff. He said, I'm looking for a lot of men. He should have included women. He would have had a better product. You have an infinite capacity to know what cannot be done. Whether you think you can or you think you cannot, you're right. That's the problem with us. Optimists do much better than pessimists. They live longer, they accomplish more, they make a lot of mistakes, but they do much better than the pessimist who in a sense is creating his own reality with his pessimism. The state of faith allows no mention of impossibility. So this is difficult, for all of us. Difficult. And by the way, just because I'm talking about the stuff doesn't mean I've mastered it. I know about it. I've been told to talk about it, but that doesn't mean that I'm there. Faith can be blind and can allow for decree. When you can decree a thing, a patient who once came to the office and he was a smart guy, and he came into the office, he didn't have an appointment, and he said, I've just come back from my gastroenterologist. He says, I've got incurable liver cancer, and I should put my affairs in order because I have less than 6 months to live. He said, the man is an idiot. I'm going to be fine. That's decree. He did great. He was already in his 80s. He would pop into the office every now and then, and he looked great. I think he died of old age. He certainly lasted, 2 or 3 years later. So that's when you have the capacity to decree. Job said, you shall also decree a thing, and it will be established for you, and the light will shine upon your days. Job was the ultimate example of faith, so much so that he annoyed Satan, because Satan came to God and said, I will get your servant Job to curse you. Give me permission to do it. And he said, yes, you can do it, but don't kill him. So he did everything short of killing Job, who stayed with his faith in spite of his friends saying, your God has abandoned you. You're all lost. So different to Moses, if you look at the Bible, and you'll see how the Bible can also teach us, the Old Testament and the New. With Moses, the Israelites were complaining in the desert bitterly because, he said, why the hell have you brought us here to die of thirst in the desert? And Moses was angry, and God said to him, speak to the rock and you will get water. So Moses made a mistake. He hit the rock with his cane and he said, there, now I'm bringing you water, because he was furious with it. And water came out of the rock. And for that reason, he was never allowed to see the land of Canaan. He said, no, you're not going to go there. You didn't have faith. You just needed to speak to the rock. Also, he took credit for it, which is, you can't take credit. If you want to materialize thing on the manifestation scale, you don't take credit for it. Who was that? I think it was Reagan who said you can achieve almost anything if you do not take credit for it. It was him or Truman, I don't remember. According to your faith is it done unto you, said Matthew. So belief is good, Most of us can believe, but we may not be able to have complete faith. So let's look into the belief versus faith story here. The ancestor said, will be given to you again according to the measure of your faith. That's more powerful. Faith is like belief on steroids. So on the right side of wisdom, you have faith and belief. And of course, you can retain belief on the understanding side. And that's where Einstein was. He was far out guy. So the ancestor said, to see has not always been to believe. I know people, I'm sure you do too, and we all do this, who don't believe in it unless they can see it or hear it or touch it or smell it or taste it. They're confining themselves to the five senses, which is very limited. There are many intuitive senses that go beyond the five senses, the third eye in yoga. So to see has not always been to believe. You'll begin to see first because you believe. So if we listen to the words of the saints, the saviors and ancient wisdom, who tell us certain things, they're all saying the same thing. All the mystical beliefs should say the same thing, and they do. If you listen to those folks and you believe them, you'll start to see things you never saw before. When you believe enough, there'll be no need for seeing. So the Native Americans were said, some of them could not see the ships of their nemesis coming to the east coast of the settlers. And that might be true because they had no construct for them. But you can be sure there were Native Americans who had a medicine person who came to them and said, listen, I've had this vision. These white people with white faces are going to come in really big canoes and they're going to make our lives a misery. And then they could see the boats coming because they had a framework in which to do it. That's why the ancestors say, with all your strength, get knowledge. Because if you don't know these spiritual principles, you will never believe. You'll be tunnel vision. There was another guy who did an interesting experiment. He took a big fish tank, he filled it with water, and he put a glass partition in the middle, and he dumped a bunch of fish into the one partition. So the fish would swim around, bump into the glass, not get anywhere, and eventually they all swam around, ignoring the glass. Then he took the glass out of the thing, and they still swam around, ignoring the glass. I don't want to be facetious, but if you could find a fish who could have gone to the other side and said, hey guys, listen, this is not true, you can do this, they would have been able to go to the other side. So, you've got to listen to the fish that are on the other side that have seen it and you believe it, and then it will happen for you. So that's a really important. Belief is powerful, and that's what we rely on mostly. And this is why they contrast it so nicely for us. They say belief requires logic, proof, seeks evidence, facts. It's connected to narrow mind, survival mind, monkey mind. That's important. Monkey mind keeps us safe. It stops us from doing crazy stuff. This is why it's a balance between the two. Faith, on the other hand, reveals proof. It trusts and surrenders. It's connected to spacious mind. It's propelled from within us. It just comes from inside, whereas belief comes from outside of us. They want facts. Belief formulates and defends itself. We argue and say, I used to do that a lot. I was very cynical when I came to some of these things at first. I wanted the proof, and then I changed. Whereas faith exalts in wonder, is embraced by unearned love. You cannot understand why grace happens. It just comes, and you can't expect it at the most unusual times. You can't expect it to happen every time. And that's the presumptiveness of faith. That's the shadow side of faith. It might work for you once, but you can't assume it's going to be there all the time you want it. You've got to work for it in a certain way. I don't understand how that works. Shadow side is dogma, restrictedness, and convictions, like I know what's going on. So this is the inner healer, which is the placebo effect, which is really important. There are 69 cases of spontaneous remission of diseases documented in faithful Christians who went to Lourdes in France. And they bathed in the water, so there was a ritual, because ritual is important. And because they believed, they had faith, they were completely cured of these terrible diseases. The Vatican has, or the Medical Commission has all the data. You can see the pre-Lourdes stuff, you can see the post-Lourdes stuff, and it's like miracle. It's like water running uphill. Absolutely unbelievable. This is more common than we think. We call it anecdotal as doctors, but it's very common in the shamanic world because they can make people believe stuff you can't see. Now, the old-time doctors knew about this. William Osler was a brilliant physician. He wrote the first medical text. He also helped formulate John Hopkins Hospital. And he said, faith in the gods or spirits cures one. Faith in little pills another. Hypnotic suggestion a third. This is important because this is where the shamans work in that sphere. They change your mindset with doing different rituals that create magic, and often mind-altering substances, which from plants, from sacred plants, they're not addicting, they change your perspective of things, and that's when magic can happen. Hypnotic suggestion a third, faith in a plain common doctor a fourth. Faith is the most precious commodity without which we would be very badly off. Sadly, with all the technology that's around us, doctors do not believe in this kind of nonsense. They want statistics. The power of prayer is greater than the power of prophecy, and there is where healing is to be found. Now, the power of prayer, especially in the form of ritual, because ritual is much more impactful on the subconscious, is more powerful than the power of prophecy, which is the prognosis, as I mentioned in that guy with his gastroenterologist, and therein is where healing to be found. So if prayer and faith and ritual, especially prayer with ritual, seems to be more important, can do miraculous things. All right, these things help. If you're suggestible, if you're gullible, if you're easily hypnotized, it's going to be easier to have faith. If your subconscious has not been programmed like most of us has with all the negativities over the years, the doctors are especially bad if they're patients because it's very hard for them to get away from the statistics. They believe in them, and that's why it's very hard for the medical profession. Ignorance is kind of bliss when it comes to faith, denial of prognoses. Magic and charisma, and that's the shamanic-like kind of thing. It doesn't have to be a shaman. Somebody who can convince you, because of some mind trip that this can happen, can create a miracle in healing and also in spiritual transformation, because it's about both. Remember that the inner healer is part of the soul. It's linked to that part of it. It has infinite potential, just like the soul has. The two are inseparable. What about truth? We've come from faith, belief to truth. They say always that reveal always truth and you will be guided about what to do. This is not the truth that we are familiar with. This is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help you God, when you swear and you go into court, but that truth goes way beyond the court. This is the spiritual truths that we don't really understand unless we start to learn them. And this is what we need to know, because we will be accountable for these truths. Your lawyer can't help you on the other side when you face the spiritual tribunal. Those truths differ. So let's see what the ancestors say about truth. There's only one truth, and that is the power of love, as well as the fact that God's love for us all. God's love is not a test. God is not a test of love. God loves us unconditionally. Karma is the test. Karma is built as a default into the soul, and you're accountable to your soul and to your own karma. So there is a cause and effect relationship. You don't get away with anything, but God continues to love you, and that's why you will come back many, many times to try and get things right. We get lots of opportunities. Truth is in the moment. The opposite can be true. This is the wisdom side, not the understanding side. You can't do this on the understanding side. You have to learn to live in paradox, because the one caveat that's about love, they say, is that the law does not serve love, do not serve the law. So there are times when if you scrutinize something and that's something, it seems like it's just, but there's no love involved, then it doesn't say disobey it, but don't serve it with your mind. Truth is in the moment. The opposite can be true. I learned to live in paradox when I did my initiation, because sometimes things are not what you seem them to be. Insisting, clinging to one's opinion does not allow truth to emerge. We must have the courage to challenge and be challenged. That's the understanding part. The intuitive is the closest to I am that I am. When you are in the wisdom sphere, the third eye sphere, you know much more about the truth. The perception of the seer is a greater sense of perception than the perception of the thinker. You have much more understanding when you're on the wisdom side than when you're on the understanding side. Truth can be ego clinging to its own image. We see this a lot now these days, convictions that are really causing a lot of problems. Take the truth from wherever it comes. Now, the reality is the Buddhists won't read Jesus's teachings, and the Christians won't read the Buddhist teachings, but the ancestors are trying to embrace all of these and say, hey, guys, get together. Things are really bad now. That's why I'm talking about this, because why would I be up here talking about it? Because they're desperate up there. Things are really bad. So they don't want any of these partitions anymore. The Buddhists and yogis are fine. They say, we're not a religion, we're a tool. Come and learn the tools, believe in Christianity, believe in Judaism, believe in Islam. We don't care. Just learn the tools. They're on the right path, or more on the right path. They have their shadow side too. Take the truth from whence it comes. I remember once getting it from a homeless guy, and he told me something in the moment that struck me, and it really made a big difference to how I was behaving. So don't be arrogant. You can learn truth from somebody who's illiterate. You sometimes to get initiated, you have to go and sit on the floor of a guy who can't read and write and learn what he's got to tell you, because it's not written in the book, and that's really important. So if you line up those truths to either side, both sides have truth. Love and God's love for us is on the wisdom side. The paradox of being in the moment and the opposite is also true, is part of the wisdom side. The intuitive can be closest to God. Again, I mentioned the Bushmen of the Kalahari. Now, whenever I would visit these folks, they had incredibly humble. They were non-judgmental. They had an unconditional positive regard for each other, unconditional love for their children. And it was all for one and one for all. And they could reach these incredibly advanced stages of consciousness. Their healers would say, if you want to be a good healer, you have to love everybody, no matter what you think about them. And the ancestors say the force of the primal manifest as love is the glory of God. The force of that primal mind, the meek mind, that's manifest as love, obviously that not all Bushmen are okay, is the glory of God. Why? Because we don't have all that, they don't have all that stuff in the way. That's the problem with my initiation. I had to get my stuff out of the way to get to the other side. It stops us. On the left side of understanding, ego clinging to its own image, accept the truth from whence it comes, be flexible, challenge and be challenged. So you can see there's truths on both sides. That's why we need to balance the polarities. So on the left side, you have understanding and wisdom. And if you look at Kabbalah and they talk about the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, they say there are 4 levels of understanding where you can learn from it. The first is the literal, which is obvious. The next is the allegorical, which are the metaphors, the parables, the stories, and so on. And the third is the interpretive. The interesting thing about Hebrew is that it has vowels, but there's a root word which can have many, many meanings. But when you change the vowels of the word and it sounds different, it changes the meaning of the word. And the Torah is written without any vowels. So if you take a word like one, I don't know much Hebrew, but one is daber, which is I speak, and you change it to dibur, it means I interpret, which changes the whole context of the sentence. So if you're starting to look at the Torah in that light, in the 4 levels, you can learn a lot, not only from the New Testament, but from the Old Testament as well. But on the side of knowing is what the Kabbalists are, the Sufis are, the Christian mystics are, the Buddhists and the yogis are. This is the secret, the mystical, the ability to see what seeing eyes can't see and hear what hearing ears cannot hear. So that's both sides of what you need. You need both of them. So if you look at understanding, information, knowledge, which is where we spend 90% of our time, it's about cognition, logic, data, facts, convictions. It's the literal. It's literally the tree of knowledge that got us kicked out of the Garden of Eden. It's the tree of acquisitiveness, of the ego, got us kicked out. The tree of life, actually, there was another tree in the garden, the tree of life, And it's said in Genesis that there are cherubim with flaming swords to guard the way into the tree of life. So in order to get to the triad of becoming, you have to be worthy. You are entering this, you're like a spiritual special forces kind of a person. It's not easy. They're trying to keep you out of there because they want to make sure that you are worthy of getting in there. The wisdom side is the seeing, the knowing. It's often common sense. Sometimes understanding just lacks common sense. For instance, our legal system, you see what's going on now. Can you actually call this person guilty and bring him to trial? For God's sake, what more information do you need? So that's because of our legal system. That's why if the law doesn't serve love, don't serve the law. Those laws are disobeying the law of love. Common sense. Intuition, mystery, the mystical, this is on that side. And I put a little heart there because without love, you can't get there. You cannot get there. So those who exploit knowledge are lost to wisdom. That's the strive for perfection. Now, people are trying to have perfect understanding, and they will spend 90% of their time on something that they're going to only get a 1% benefit from, which is, in a sense, is kind of insanity, especially when time is so short. So the other side, wisdom is about excellence. It's about a sufficiency of excellence unto itself. There's got to be enough for you to do the job. You don't have to perseverate and be OCD about the understanding of it. The value of information is its use and transformation. The problem is now most of us here in the last third or the last half of our lives. So time is short and things, we don't know what's going to happen anymore. So it's now time to really get a hold of some of these things. And, we can spend all day looking at YouTube. It's fascinating. And as cruising the internet, you can learn all sorts of amazing stuff. But they say rather than learn all that stuff, unless it's useful for information, for transformation, it's not going to be helpful to you. There's a certain amount you need to know for your livelihood and so on, for your needs, but for the rest, rather devoted to transformation. So there's information, knowledge, understanding on the left, and wisdom, virtue, holiness, and feeling on the right. So the ancestors say information is not to be equated with knowledge. You've got all the information you want on your smartphone. Doesn't mean we know anything about it. Knowledge is not to be equated with understanding. I saw this at medical school, which is kind of interesting. In the preclinical years, we had students which were brilliant. They were straight A students. They obviously had photographic kind of memories, and they just aced it, A plus. And I used to think these guys are going to make amazing doctors. I can't hope to be anything like that. When it came to the clinical years, they weren't so good because understanding the knowledge didn't match one another. So knowledge is not to be equated with understanding. Some of them knew too much and they couldn't sort it out. There were too many variables, too many options. And they got a little confused and they started to, instead of going straight to the point, they got a bit lost in the plot. So knowledge is not to be equated with understanding. Understanding is not to be equated with wisdom. Doesn't mean you have any of the seeing ability that the shaman or the bushman or the yogi has. Understanding is not to be equated with wisdom. And wisdom is not to be equated with virtue or holiness or feeling. So this is the story of the fallen gurus, these guys, brilliant men who came from India, and they taught us all this stuff that was completely foreign to Western minds. And was so fascinating. They gained a lot of traction, a lot of fame, a lot of money, and they fell out of grace, literally. So they lost the virtue, they lost the holiness, they lost the feeling, the heartfeltness, and they fell down into the most base parts of the ego triad, really base, because they abuse their students materially, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and even sexually. So they lost the plot completely. They didn't have any virtue, any holiness, or any feeling, because the temptations were too great for them. So you have to take somebody, you rise to the level of your temptation. That's what's so difficult. And like we'll talk about the dark forces, they're going to make you rise to the level of that temptation. And it's going to be very difficult when you're trying to get through the gates. So do not consider it proof because it is written in books. For a liar who will deceive with his tongue will not hesitate to do so with his pen. Now you can do it with a keyboard. There's just seems that lying is so prevalent. It's gone viral. It's metastasizing everywhere. And I know I read a lot of books where I knew the person who wrote the book, and a lot of it was not true because I was there at the time. But they want to embellish the truth to make it sell and so on. So they cross the line between truth and no truth. So truth is a fickle thing. Information is not to be equated with knowledge. So facts can be misused and are not the same as truth. We can make data lie. We can get really brilliant people who will give you evidence as to why climate change is not happening. That sort of thing. Data can lie. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. They probably are, but they're both pretty bad. Being aware of the lesson is different from learning it. It's like, that's the value of testing, because now they're trying to go away from testing. It's only when you test it that you know something. I remember that often I would write something about what I'm talking about now. I'd write it in a book, and I thought, that's not right, because when you write it down, it starts to change. It starts to shapeshift into more truth. And the more you write it down, the more it shapeshifts. So being aware of the lesson is different from learning it. Knowledge is not to be equated with understanding. In other words, how much have you really encompassed that you can use? There's a Native American saying that says, if you can't grow corn with it, what use is it? So you've got to be able to encompass the knowledge for it to work for you. Understanding is not to be equated with wisdom, knowing and seeing. And wisdom is not to be equated with virtue or holiness or heartfeltness. Knowing the path differs from following it. So be careful of a sage on the stage who says everything. Rather, you want a guide on the side who's going to help you. There's no such thing as a guru. Krishnamurti was the one who wrote lots of books about it. Nobody can tell you where to go. You've got to find your own way. You take what you can from who you can, and you leave the rest, and you move on to the next thing. So knowing the path is different from following it. And if you start to get to somebody who's kind of toxic and is like a fallen guru kind of a guy, better to read the book than to be exposed to the pollution of his environment. The saying would be, don't do what I say, do what I say. Those are the sages on the stages, not the guides on the side. Make sure your teacher is somebody who's doing what he says he's doing. This is the summary of it all, because some of these things, when you look at them in isolation, don't mean as much. But they say you will come from doubt to belief, from belief to understanding, from understanding to knowing, and from knowing to feeling. That's the hard thing. This is the way. So there's a trajectory, and that's why this semantics is important. Wisdom without love is deceit of the soul. So you've got to still have the love triad working with the triad of becoming. What about trust and surrender and its opposite, which is resignation? One of the things that are the opposites of trust and surrender, besides resignation, that lead to resignation, is doubt, denial, and disbelief. The thing about disbelief, if you don't believe in the field, they cannot help you. You cut yourself off from that possibility, because free will is a cosmic law. They can't help you because you don't believe in them. I had a guy once who came for a divination, and I couldn't read anything, and I threw again, I couldn't read anything. And I said to him, why are you here? He said, I'm only here because my wife gave it to me as a birthday present. This is a bunch of crap. And I said, well, I can't help you, sorry. So if you disbelieve, it's disrespectful, but it's also, they can't help you even if they want to, because of free will being the cosmic law. So doubt is okay, but denial and disbelief is not okay. Doubt is okay. So trust and surrender with doubt, denial, and disbelief overriding it will lead to resignation. And we're going to see the differences between surrender and resignation. Trust and doubt are not mutually exclusive. We are not asked not to doubt, but to trust. So you can actually doubt, but still trust. To trust more is not always to doubt less, but rather to act with certainty in the face of doubtfulness. In other words, you doubt it, but you take a leap of faith anyway. Doubt can be a way of exploring wonder. So when you look at the hero, the heroine's journey, there's first a separation phase, which is doubt. There's fear. It's scary. You're going to separate from what's familiar to you. Your friends are saying you must be out of your mind, but you separate, you go on the journey, you enter the threshold of sacred space, which is a region of wonder. But the wonder is terrifying because you don't know what the hell is going on. It's out of your, out of your league. But it is a place where you'll get the grail if you trust, even if you doubt it. So I can give you my example, because when I was going to South Africa in the late 90s, and I was checking in with the Sangomas, the indigenous healers, asking them questions about my life, they would always answer me very accurately. And these were different Sangomas in different parts of the country. Every single one of them almost said to me, yes, this is what you want, but you're not why you're here. The ancestors want you to do our work, divination, dreams, and plant medicines. And I was very flattered. I thought this would be fantastic if I could do it, but I'm a left brain kind of a guy. I don't have that capacity. I had an exposure to shamans. I couldn't do any of the things they could do. I didn't believe them. Eventually, the evidence was so overwhelming that I couldn't do anything but go and try. But I went there thinking it's not going to work, but I have to try it. So I found a teacher in Swaziland, and I spent some time with him, and he threw the bones. He agreed with the other Sangomas, and I started to see things happening, So even though I doubted, I trusted enough to take the trouble to do what they told me to do, and then things sort of turned out okay. I expected fully to walk with my tail between my legs to say, look, I told you so. I knew it wasn't going to work. And, I'll go and have a nice holiday now in Swaziland or something like that. So it's okay to doubt. Don't worry about that. But trust anyway. Trust in what the sages are telling you. And then you can go into that, a little bit of the other 99% world. We live, the ancestors say, in a 1% world. The field is unknowable. 99% of the field is totally unknowable to us. Now, if you can get to the wisdom side, you're probably getting 2 or 3% instead of 1%, but it's still meaningful because it's going to change your life. It's going to puts you in a place that's very different. We are not limited by those natural laws of the universe that we ourselves have created. Science is very arrogant. Science is always disproving itself, but yet they remain arrogant. Medicine is always disproving its dogma. And, we think we've got all the answers. Things that I'm doing today, I can't believe I would have done 20 years ago. So we create laws which are not really true. So we can go where we don't think we can go. Miracles happen not in opposition to nature or the natural world, but in opposition to what we know about the natural world and nature. And this is where the hunter-gatherers are so important, because they know the secrets, some of the secrets of nature that we don't know. Those secrets that are hidden in modesty that he's talking about, spoken with an unintelligible tongue. They know a lot of those, and they're magical. I mean, I couldn't understand how they were doing these things. How did he know there was a hyena there when I couldn't see him, he couldn't see him, we couldn't hear him, couldn't smell him, but he was there and they knew. How do they track when, some of them don't even look at the tracks, and they say, we put on animal mind and we go where they're going. They're not actually even following the tracks. They might start with the tracks, but then they're just following where their mind and eyes showing the animal is going. That's magical stuff that we can't believe is true, but you can see it when you're with them. And I can't do it. I'll never do that stuff, but they can do it. We can do other stuff. We each have a unique ability to do something, and you have to find that ability. Don't look to other people as to what their abilities are, because you'll just be frustrated. That's what happened with me. I was always looking, well, I can't do that. I can't do this. But there was something I could do. So that makes a difference. And it's true for all of us. So resignation is a giving up. It seems, the opposite of surrender, which is a giving in. When we think of waving the white flag, we think we're giving in to a higher power. In a sense, you are in spiritual surrender. You're giving in to a higher power, but you're not giving up, which is very different. The journey itself is a place of being. It is never finished. The being is always becoming. The road to this place is the road of surrender. So you've got to trust and surrender. If a person wants to be sure of the road she or he treads on, he must close his eyes and walk in the darkness. That's St. John of the Cross. So you have to really surrender, and some of those qualities are as follows. And they're induced by the mystery that's around us. The mystery invites us to surrender what is inexplicable. Einstein said, knowledge is the knowledge of children. We'll know a little more than we know now, but the true nature of things we will never know, never. So the quantum physicists are actually a little bit ahead of the physicists. They'll say anybody who thinks they understand quantum physics doesn't understand it. They built this accelerator in CERN to find the God particle, and what it created was more confusion, more questions to be asked. So surrender is not giving up, but a giving in to something greater than oneself, a giving of oneself. It's about flexibility, receptivity, fearlessness, letting go, being in the flow. It's not about grasping and attachment. It's about non-attachment. Non-attachment. It embraces hope, faith, belief, trust. So there are nuances. They all sound the same, but they're not. Trust is the one thing to do with surrender. It connects to the field, the creator, our ancestors, our guides, acknowledging a higher force. So these are really key to not only to healing, but also, one of the aspects of spontaneous remission was the ability to surrender and to trust, even if you didn't have the faith. Detachment is not the same as non-attachment. Detachment comes out of resignation. Resignation is the couch potato syndrome, if you like. It's, I can't do anything about climate change or COVID, and now there's monkeypox, and there's terrible politics. Everybody lies. I may as well go sit on my couch, drink beer, eat junk food, and watch TV. And that's the couch potato syndrome. So that's the resignation leading to detachment. Detachment is a lifeless world of hopelessness, indifference, desperation, dejection, despair, no longer caring. Somebody once said to me, ever since I gave up hope, I feel much better. Hope, resignation is comfortable. There's nothing you can do, so you can resign. It's complacency, but it's not okay spiritually. It's going to be accountable for resignation. Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed. Got some comfort to that. Expectation is essential for motivation. So that'll turn us on to hope eventually. Attachment spiritually is desirable, and it's about having an expectation. So when we're talking about non-attachment, we're talking about non-attachment to the triad of ego, to the yoke of ego that the yogis talk about. That's what the non-attachment is about. Non-attachment to judgment, desire of certain objects, and self-cherishing of the persona. That's what we must be non-attached to. But our spiritual practice, we must be attached to. Spiritual information, we must be attached to. We must have an expectation for that as well in order to develop. So hope versus hopelessness. Hope is about expectation. Hopelessness is about desperation. So hope is about believing in the evidence and then watching the evidence change. Again, slightly different to all the others. It's about believing in the non-existent and then seeing it coming into existence, or believing in something that's not seen yet, but then is seen later. But it requires expectation, because hope without expectation is an unlit candle in a single-winged bird. There's a Sufi saying that says, trust in God, but tie your camel. I'll elaborate on that. It should be trust in God, hope for the best, have trust, surrender, believe, have faith, and tie your camel. That's, you've got to do your own part. So, we cannot just sit back and have all these things intellectually and expect for them to work. Hope requires action. Having deep knowledge alone is not enough to actualize it. I don't have time to talk about this one, but maybe it'll come up in the questions. She or he is the best physician who is the most ingenious inspirer of hope. Oncologists today can really inspire hope because they have magical things. The probability these days is that you will live your life out even with a bad cancer, even though you may not be cured. You'll die of old age, because they can really give hope, because they have tools now to give hope. When I started medicine, we didn't have those tools. It was a bit difficult for them, I'm sure, to lie. In South Africa, they couldn't lie. They never gave hope. America, they always had hope. When I came here in 1975, they were always very positive, even before we had some of these medicines. There are many forms of transformation. So this is the polarity balance. We're now going to the center column. We've talked about the right, we talked about the left, we're now going to the center. There are many forms of transformation, just as there are many sacred paths and holy prayers. You are to find the one for you. So, mindful meditation, transcendental meditation, all those are great, but if they don't work for you, don't do them. Even the Buddha said, continuing with a spiritual practice that no longer serves you is like carrying a raft on your back after you've crossed a river. I mean, I did TM, I gave it up. I'm not a very good meditator, so I'd like to do a bodily oriented meditation, yoga, asanas, the postures, and I like to hike and, walk on the beach. That's my way of connecting. Everybody's different. So just find the one that works for you. It might be dancing. It might be playing a musical instrument. It might be drumming. Can be anything as long as it's done for its own sake and not to perform or look good or get anything perfect. It's just to go inwards and be done regularly almost every single day for at least 20 minutes. It just takes 20 minutes to tune in. It's really important if you're not going to get in the middle path of the Buddha or in the middle column of the tree of life without the spiritual practice. It's absolutely key. An embodied practice is really stronger. The ancestors say the route to God is through the senses, through the body. From my flesh shall I behold the Creator. In my body, you will see it's body, mind, and spirit. It starts in the body. Body is really important. Balance is achieved by harmonizing polarity. So you've got the right side of the tree, the left side of the tree, the two poles. Dualities come into harmony by negotiating a third or a middle path. So if you think of you're driving your canoe, your spiritual canoe down the river of life, heading to the other side, because that's where we're going to go pretty soon. Our shelf lives are all expiring for some of us more so than others. And you're going to the other side. When you bump up against the bank of love, which is the right side of the tree, don't stop and get out and indulge, enjoy the moment and move back into the midstream. When you go to the bank of fear, which is the left side, don't get out and pitch your camp and have a pity party. Move as quickly as you can back to midstream. You're only going to do that with spiritual practice. You have to maintain your balance, your equanimity. So they say dualities come into harmony by negotiating a third or a middle path. And this is the key thing. It's a path not of assimilation, but a path of coexistence. So there's shadow sides on both sides. There's more shadow on the left with fear than on the right with love. But you can't love so much that your brains fall out, on the floor. So they both have shadow sides. So this is a testament to your spiritual worthiness, that you're in now the spiritual forces. When you can balance these things and you don't assimilate the bad, you just coexist with it. The bad is actually good because it's a test of your fortitude. It's a test of your spiritual practice. How do you overcome it? You've got to have the sacred and the profane. You've got to have the good and the bad, the evil and, the good and the bad, the light and the dark, because otherwise it would be like diabetes, spiritual diabetes. You had no tension. You can't develop. So we must coexist but not assimilate. So we're going to summarize how we're ending up, and we have time for questions. Actually, plenty of time. And the left side contracts. It's more about fear, understanding. It's about hopelessness, disbelief, doubt, denial, resignation, detachment, despair. That's what we don't want to assimilate. We coexist with that. On the other side, we have hope, belief, trust, surrender, virtue, holiness, feeling, heartfeltness, the love, expansion thing, the wisdom. We need both of them. The one keeps us safe, the other one helps us develop. And then in the middle, we have faith. We talked about that. We have union or unity in the center, because that's where we're striving for. Will is the thing that holds the balance on the central column of the tree. Herzl said, if you will it, it is not a dream. If you will it, it's not fantasy, it's not an imagination. If you have the will, which goes along with a lot of faith and belief, things can happen, but you've got to will it, and that takes work. And that's, that slide sort of summarized most of it, except for the little black thing in the middle there, called the tricksters. So we're going to end off with them. At least my voice lasted better than last time. Last time these masks really affect my voice. And then insidious achievement of the dark forces is in persuading some people to disbelieve in their existence. So if there's forces out there on the other side of the veil between worlds, on this side of the veil between worlds, we have plenty of dark forces. We see them, the Putin archetypes of the world, all the other darkness that's going on. But on the other side of the veil, there are forces that are there that the light is a reproach to them. They don't want to see you coming to the Triad of Becoming. They want to keep you down. They want to keep you in the dark with them. They have a heart of envy. It comes from a heart of envy. They don't want you to have, the ring, in Lord of the Rings. They're going to be tricksters who want the ring, so you can't have it. It's not that they even want it. They just want you not to have it. So there's nothing you can think or intend that is not accessible to dark forces that they will not attempt to corrupt. So they know, remember, your ancestors, your guides know your karmic life book. They know who you were in your past lives. They have access to that. They know your mission. They know your destiny. They're trying to help you to get there. They know your archetype. They know who you're supposed to be. And they can't tell you what to do, but they want to push you gently in that direction. If you ask to receive and you're on this kind of journey, then they can respond. It's not easy, but it does come in different ways to you. But in addition, these other forces, they also know your karmic life book because they have equal access to the field. It's like the internet. The dark forces have equal access, so do they in the field. So they know your weak spots of your monkey mind, your narrow mind. They know your weak spots in your shadow. They know your weak spots in your ego. And they're going to work on that link in the chain that is going to be the thing that's going to get you out. Like the fallen gurus were deprived. They hadn't ever experienced a beautiful woman. They had never had any money. They probably walked around without shoes. So it's not difficult to understand why suddenly they were brought here and they fell, because you can be sure that the tricksters made sure that they fell and brought them all those things. They accentuated. You can be sure that the of the world and the Mexican gangs who give tribute to Satan, they have power that we don't understand. It's not just that they're completely demented. They have power from this dark side, but that's not what we're talking about. It's only when you're a Buddha or you're a Christ that you're going to have opposition from Satan. We're going to have lesser oppositions according to what we are on the tree of life. It'll depend on that. So there's nothing that they don't know that your ancestors know. And the other advantage they have is that they don't have to abide by the law of free will. So that you can have evil intentions and then you're giving them permission to act on your behalf, even if you don't know they're acting on your behalf. So in a sense, they are abiding by the law of free will, but they're not giving it to them explicitly. The ones who give it to them explicitly will have tremendous power. And the ones who make rituals to that will also have similar power. But love will overcome fear, so we have the edge on that. But the reason I'm talking about that, not because you need to worry about this, because that's not really what you have to do, but it's important because we have to at least understand it and what's going on in the planet. The closer we come to the light, the more the negative inclinations plague us. So as soon as you start to get up to the Triad of Becoming, it's going to get more serious. They attempt to interfere, dissuade, and corrupt. They cut us off from access to our deeper and purer selves. That's their job. They're professionals. They're very good at what they do. They know exactly what to do, and they're excellent at it. They know how to do things. So Mary Ellen Kelly, who channeled a lot of this information, most of it really, I got a lot of one-liners in my songs, in my dreams, and some other messages and metaphors. But Mary Ellen Kelly, who left the planet several years ago, channeled most of these. And I remember we used to try and ponder this one. I was in the woods one day listening to some trees. One of them whispered to me that the higher the branches into heaven, the deeper the roots into hell. So the reality is that the tree of life is an ancient archetype that's unique to many, many cultures. And it's the link between heaven and earth. It's to help us get beyond. This is the Celtic tree. And if you look at the tree of life here, you see the dark spot on the bottom in kingdom is furthest from the light. We know that now more than ever because of what's going on the planet. It just seems to be surrounded in darkness. But some of that darkness is because the light is actually greater and the darkness is getting scared. And that's why it's protesting too much. So in a way, it's a reversal of what things should be. So we should have hope because they're testing us more because they're worried that they're losing. So when you go up the tree and you look at where we are, the triad, this is where the light and dark will meet again. When you're trying to get into the Garden of Eden, firstly, the cherubim want to make sure that you're worthy, but the tricksters are going to trying to get you down the tree into the triad of ego again. So if you look at the tree, the tree of ego, in a sense, is they're not worried about you. You might have tricksters coming along every now and then to play around with you. Literally, they're just playing around with you. Ancestors used to call it mosquitoes at your spiritual picnic. You don't actually have a spiritual picnic yet because you're in that triad. When you get into the triad of love, you're going to have hornets or wasps at your spiritual picnic because now they're getting worried. You're becoming more visible to the dark side of the spiritual world, especially if you're doing spiritual work with your love. You're going to be, if you're a healer, you're going to be much more visible to them. And the healers that say, oh, I just surround myself with a dome of light, I'm fine. Mostly they will be fine, but then they're not really going very far. As soon as you get up to the triad of becoming, you can't surround yourself with a dome of light. There you've got the black mambas and the rattlesnakes and the cobras at your picnic. They're not going to hurt you, they're not going to kill you, but they're just going to play on your fears. They're going to make fear propel you in the wrong direction, even though you don't know it, that they're working on your fear, but working on your weak link in your chain. So this is what's going to happen. It's like when you get there, it's called a costly compliment. It means when you are getting attacked in this way, and some of you in this audience are there already, you don't be surprised that you are getting done that. Some of you will be confronting the spiritual mafia, is what I like to call them. They're professionals. They're not going to kill you, but they're going to take you down if they can. They want you to fall, and they'll use the very thing that you are the weakest at. With men, it's probably a beautiful woman. Nothing wrong with a woman. They're usually devotees in the spiritual world, and there's nothing wrong with what happens. Basically, their attention gets diverted away from their practice, and they go in another direction, and everybody's happy, and they've won. So they've taken you out of the light. So it can be very subtle. It doesn't have to be devious or evil. It can be very subtle and can feel real good. Now I'm really much more happy than I was before. I don't have all that opposition, because when you don't have any opposition, you're not truly navigating this triad. You're gonna be opposed. It doesn't get easier, it gets more difficult. So this is a summary of the three triads. According to the ancestors, it will be given to you according to the measure of your humility. That's the triad of ego. To the extent that you can subordinate ego to the higher self, you're going to get into the triad of love. And the biggest thing there is non-judgmental attitudes, looking at everybody as the divinity in everybody will give you access to the triad of love. Will be given to you according to the measure of your love. So now you're going up a step higher, tried higher. And then ultimately it will be given to you according to the measure of your faith. But also not just your faith, but you can't have faith. All the other things that we talked about are going to get you there. And then, if you're really getting there, expect to be opposed, and you will be, but as long as you have faith, that's where the faith comes in, you'll be fine. That's probably with the main thing where the faith side comes in, is just inner knowing that you'll be taken care of. So I'm going to do a little meditation now, and I can't really see anybody. I think Trevor can see the others. I see some of them behind me, but my screen is expanded. But you guys now that are online can see the folks here like you could last time. But at least we can interact, and when people ask questions, you'll know who's asking the question. Trevor will unmute them. But before that, let's do a little meditation and sit up straight. and close your eyes. And these words, I don't remember where they came from. They might have actually come from my musician friend, who also channeled from time to time. But I think the song speaks to the emanation part of the triad of becoming. So just relax and breathe deeply in and out. Expand your lungs completely. Exhale, and if anything, increase the exhalation phase. And you can focus on the breathing or the words of the song or anything. And just release your neck, release your face, release your jaw, release your neck and your shoulders. Let all the negativity of the past week just sort of drain away from you. And then just go in with the white music and see where it takes you, whichever way you want to do, imagine or breathe, or doesn't matter. The enlightened will receive, the adept will perceive the golden husks, the harvest of the mind. The enlightened will receive, the adept will perceive the golden husks, the harvest of the mind. Telling it like it is, telling it as it is. They see but do not see, they hear but do not hear. The unmoved mover, set in stone. Telling it like it is, telling it as it is. They see but do not see, they hear but do not hear. The unmoved mover, set in stone. To start on the lines of emanation, always be in purity. To start on the lines of emanation, always be in purity. The enlightened will receive, the adept will perceive the golden husks, the harvest of the mind. The enlightened will receive, the
The adepts will perceive the golden husks, the harvest of the mind. Telling it like it is, telling it as it is. They see but do not see, they hear but do not hear. The unmoved mover, set in stone. Telling it like it is, telling it as it is. They see but do not see, they hear but do not hear. The unmoved mover, set in stone. To start on the lines of emanation, always be in purity. To start on the lines of emanation, always be in purity. To start on the lines of emanation, always be telling it like impurities. To start on the lines of emanation, always be in purity, telling it as it is. To start on the lines of emanation, always be in purity. To start on the lines of emanation, always be in purity.
You can slowly come back, open your eyes. I think you should be able to unmute yourselves. If you want to ask a question, or if you prefer, you can just write it in the chat box. While people think and ponder, I will just mention a few things because I said I'd say something about hope. It's interesting that when the first white settlers from the Dutch East India Company came to South Africa, they encountered the Hottentots and the Bushmen. And they had livestock, they had goats and they had sheep and things like that. And to the Bushmen, these were game. There was fair game. And what would happen was that they would slaughter. They couldn't understand why it wasn't running away from them, but they would slaughter the animal and eat it. And they would get arrested and they would be put in jail. And these were healthy young Bushmen who could probably go days without water and even probably weeks without food because they were used to doing that. And they were given food, water and bread or whatever in their cell. And the jailers would come across them and find out that they, in fact, had died in the cell. Because the Bushmen are so much in the present moment that they couldn't conceive of a time when they would ever get out of that place. So hope is an incredible thing. If you have hopelessness, it can be like a death sentence, literally. It's what we call the nocebo effect, the power of belief to hurt, harm, or even to kill you. And in reality, I went to this, I had this dream about this healing center in South Africa. And eventually I found the place that I had to build. And the reason I think they sent me there was twofold. One was to learn about witchcraft. And the other one was to learn the medicinal plants. I didn't think I would be dealing with witchcraft, but I remember my teacher saying to me, you'll be dealing with it whether you like it or not. At that stage of my life, I didn't believe that witchcraft worked unless you believed in it. But it works if you believe in it and if you don't believe in it. It works more powerfully if you believe in it. So in other words, the nocebo response, and you know you've been bewitched, and you think the witch is more powerful than anybody else, which can be a death sentence in South Africa. So there's a story about an African fellow who worked for a white family in Johannesburg, and I'm assuming it's true, I don't know where it came from. And this man came to his family, young, healthy guy, said, I'm going home to die. And the family said, but why? You look okay. We'll take you to the doctor and he'll check you. No, I'm going home. I'm going to die. So they took him to a physician and they did all the tests, the blood work, the CT scans, the ultrasounds, everything was normal. And they said, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. There's no reason for you to die. He said, no, I'm going home to die. So he goes home and he dies. And then a week after that, he's dead. The family member contacts him to tell, because they were very close to him, that the guy has died. And trying to remember exactly what they said. But the woman who called them said to the family, that he's dead, he died. So the family said, we don't understand, we had him checked and there was nothing wrong with him. He said, no, you see, there was something behind the bones that nobody could see that killed him, which is basically what you're talking about, witchcraft. It's a really powerful force. So just to tell you that there are these things, and in reality, it's even on this side of the globe, it's prevalent all over the globe. So if you get a combination of lack of hope, as well as there's what's called distant healing. Distant healing has been proven by many double-blind studies. You can take a group of patients and you can divide them into two, double-blind, and the one group gets healed from a distance with standard therapy. It's a comparable group, and the other group gets just the standard therapy. There's a significant difference between the ones who are being healed by healers from afar, even though they didn't know about it. So this is what's called a field effect. This is distant healing. Distant healing works. If people pray for you, it can help you because they're invoking power from the field to help you. So this is really powerful. But the opposite is also true. There are no double-blind studies to show that witchcraft works, but I know it works. I don't believe it works. I know it works because I changed my point of view very quickly from you don't have to know about it for it to affect you. So the reality is, and there are no double-blind studies, but that's what you call the effect of distant hexing, which is the polar opposite of distant healing. And no one is ever going to do a double-blind study about that, I'm pretty sure, because you really can't. But it works just the same as distant healing does. So when you have the combination of a belief in something where you know it's true, even if you didn't know it was true, it would still work because you believe in it, the nocebo effect, and you have the distant healing. And if you have guilt in addition, like you feel you've done something wrong and maybe you deserve not to be well, then it can be a death sentence. And this is known all over the world. It's not common, unique to South Africa. People get killed in indigenous societies from witchcraft, often because, there are no lawyers there. So they go to a witch who witches somebody. If you really messed up the guy's business, or maybe you've slept with his wife, they're not going to go to a lawyer, they're going to go to a witch. And then if you feel that you are guilty and at some level you feel you don't deserve to be well, and you know that witchcraft works, and you know you've been bewitched, and you know that the witch is actually very powerful, it is a death sentence. So, those are some of the factors that are really important, especially for us in terms of healing, because it's really important to have hope and to do all the things that are on the right side of the tree of life. When I wrote this book about the spirit of healing, it was actually about the tree of health, to use the tree of life as an example for healing. Because like I said, the inner healer is part of the soul. So in reality, the soul, the inner healer has incredible potential if all the playing field is level in terms of all these qualities. Hope, belief, faith, trust, and clean the slate. Make sure there's nothing that's causing you to feel you don't deserve. You have people there that, I'm sure Christians who went to Lourdes, but they believed that maybe they deserved to die because they had sinned against God, but maybe they went anyway, but they weren't healed because they had the guilt part of it. A lot of religious people who falsely believe God is going to punish you for your sins in this lifetime. No, that's not how karma works. You don't get sick because you did bad things. You can get sick because of witchcraft. It can make you not feel well. It's energetic sickness. But the energetic sickness can create physical sickness too. So that might bring up some other questions for any others. Yes, there's one.
A little while ago, you talked about the tree, listening to the trees. I don't recall the wording, but it dealt with the higher the branches up to the heavens, the lower the roots into evil or to hell. Correct. Could you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a bit of convoluted. But when you're getting up on the triad of becoming, the hell realms that are usually down here playing in this field and kingdom, Putin's allies and all that, they're going to come up into the higher branches of the tree to oppose you. It's like when you're down here, this triad of ego, well, you're not a challenge. When you get up here, you're more of a challenge. But when you get up here, the whole thing is going to be compounded. So in other words, you're going to elicit what I like to call the spiritual mafia. You're going to come and try and take you out in one way or another, usually by giving what tempts you the most. You rise to the level of your temptation. So the Buddha was given, and obviously nobody in this audience is there, but the Buddha was given 3 levels. And the final one was a beautiful woman who came to him, because that's always a temptation. I'm sure the Buddha had like a concubine when he was in the palace. I don't know what the others have had, but I know they're Buddhist monks who've fallen, and usually it's one of those things that's going to take them out. So what's happening is it doesn't feel like there's anything going on. It's just like they fall out of grace and nobody knows what's going on. But in reality, that was all programmed. So I had a friend I knew from the CIA who once said, "You're not paranoid if you think somebody's going to kill you if you're in the CIA. If you're in the triad of becoming, you're not paranoid if you think somebody's going to take you out spiritually, not killing you. It's real, but it may be very subtle and very, very, you don't know that it's happening."
It seems paradoxical because the deeper the roots, if you think about a tree or an apple tree, the deeper the roots and the watering and the health, then the more health that comes as you get higher in the tree. It requires the deeper roots to give it nutrition. But in this case, the deep roots seem to be evil, again, working against as you rise to a higher level.
That's right.
I don't know if I said that the right way.
You said it right. In the natural course of events, this is a different kind of a tree. This is more the tree of knowledge. The serpent is waiting for you. The black mamba is coiled around the tree, waiting. When you get up to the top where the best fruits are, then you're going to be tempted. It's not the same tree as you're right about the tree. The tree can have many meanings. The Bushmen call the baobab tree the upside down tree, because the branches are so huge. It's like the branches look much bigger than the roots. I'm not sure that they are, but they call it the upside down tree. So there are many interpretations of the tree, of which yours is correct. The deeper the roots of the tree, the more healthful the tree. But not in this case. This is a different tree. So it's good question, because it's an important distinction. Yeah.
David, in your book that I just finished, you talked about going to the Kalahari and getting to know the San people and how close they were to nature. And as you said, how much they live in the present because of that closeness to nature. Is that disappearing, that those peoples who are closer to nature just because of the encroachment of what one might call civilization?
Sadly, yes, it is. We've polluted the whole thing. They've lost their habitat. So wherever they used to live and they could hunt and gather,
right,
they can't anymore. The Botswana government have compromised them significantly. Prince Charles was trying to help at one stage. There was what was called the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. And there were Bushmen living in the Central Kalahari who were allowed to hunt with their own weapons. But the Botswana government, gave them, in quotes, permission. But when they would go and hunt and they found them, they would beat them and they would confiscate the game. And then eventually they evicted them out of the Kalahari Game Reserve so that there could be more of a tourist attraction. They put them in poverty situations, but they didn't have to hunt and gather. They were given subsistence food and they were given water. So that was their compensation, because life was hard there. But I don't think the spiritual, they've retained the trance dance. You can still go there and experience the trance dance. You may not get the unpolluted version now, because there's a lot of it being done for tourism. But no, that's the same as indigenous people everywhere. Alcohol and, prostitution of the woman and so on, they fall apart. And this is what we've done. The problem with the Kalahari and the Aborigines as well is these days, everything is accessible. So there's no place you can hide. And there's always going to be people who will find resources. They found, I think, diamonds in the Central Kalahari Desert, and that's what got them evicted. So there's always going to be that fixed factor, plus the fact that the Botswana government regarded the Bushmen as subhuman. They didn't acknowledge the fact that they were really like Tibetan Buddhists in a sense. So in the Amazon, it seems there are still tribes that are so remote that they are retaining and are trying to retain their habitat. But it's a battle, So somebody once said to me, you can't retain the Bushmen, but you can retain their consciousness. So, we can at least learn from them and try and go primal every now and again, try and get rid of all the educational stuff that's getting in the way. The moment, I think I haven't been there for 20 years, so I don't know. But I know people have gone and have still been impressed, and I think they've retained a lot of those qualities. But the thing about the purity side of it, I remember, this is a story about a guy, you won't know who he is, so I can talk about it, who went to the Bushmen, and he said that he actually was able to do the trance dance. He wrote a few books about it. And I remember I had an old friend, his name was Isak Barnard, who was an Afrikaner, who took me into the Kalahari quite a few times. And he knew this guy because he traveled with him and he'd taken around to all these places. And I asked him, I said, did this guy actually do the job? And he said, I don't think he was pure enough. And he was a good guy with all the attributes of, a spiritual being in the white context, in the context of what we know. But the purity of the hunter-gatherer, where you rely so much on your intuitive knowledge. You can't hunt and gather unless you are going way beyond the five senses. You will never survive. Doesn't matter how much knowledge you've had. You won't be able to heal anybody unless you can travel to the spirit world and get information. And they would tell them where to go and hunt. And they would tell them, the spirit world, where to move to when they were nomadic and they would travel. they would eat themselves out of a place, and they'd move to the next place. So it was like crop rotation. It was completely sustainable. So that kind of information was completely vital to them. And the fact that they could heal people, they were always renowned as being amazing healers, because the people they were healing believed they'd seen it before. They weren't like us. It was interesting, talking about things that happened. I went with my son to the Kalahari, and we ended up in Kai Kai, which is a Bushman encampment, where the chief, the Herero chief, was very supportive of the Bushmen, acknowledged them and understood who they were and was trying to help them. We went to a trance dance that was just done for the two of us. And one guy fell into trance and they fall down. If you want, you can see there's a small 4-minute video on the Bushman trance dance on my website. He fell into trance, and I saw his foot was in the fire for long enough to sustain a 3rd-degree burn. One of the women, of course, took it out of the fire. I went afterwards, I looked at his foot, and there was nothing there. It was normal, and they're known to control fire, but way beyond what we know about fire walking. Bushmen put their head in the fire because they feel very hot in their trance dance, so that their vibration is simulating that of the fire, so they feel comfortable with the fire. But anyway, I asked, there were 2 Bushmen there, and I asked them, am I okay? Do I have anything that you saw about me that I need to know about? No, you're very healthy, you're fine. To me, that was better than any CAT scan, because I saw what had happened, It's like when you see that, this guy, if he says I'm fine, then I'm fine. Any other questions?
Karen's got a question. I'll ask her to unmute.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe.
She's unmuted. Okay.
Aaron?
Okay, I have a little comment regarding what you said about being intuitive and knowing where to roam and find food. And it made me think that animals that do that, who live their whole life intuitively, I believe that they are closer to God than us, because we've become so disconnected from God and nature. I just wanted to make that comment. But my questions to you was, in the realm of witchcraft, if we feel someone's put shade on us or whatever, a curse, how does that get undone? That's one question. And the second question is, through spiritual practice, can we get back to the garden to sit under the tree of life versus the tree of knowledge with spiritual practice? So
answer the last one first. Absolutely. Everybody can do it. It's not unique to anybody. So you can do that for sure. I'll just address the other one about the animals. I remember my teacher saying to me once, and this is true, the animals are closest to God because they're doing exactly what God wants them to do. The only time they don't do that is when they become domesticated by us, and then they behave like we want them to behave. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of the fact that the animals are closer to God than we are. They're part of the creation. That's kind of where I think the creators is getting kind of upset about us. So there was also this famous Sangoma Sanusi, who was a seer prophet, Triad, who said of all the animals, the birds have the highest consciousness. And it's interesting that when you look at the yoga system of chakras, the elements go from earth to water to fire to air to ether. But you look at the tree of life in Kabbalah and the 4 directions on Kabbalah, or the 6 directions, the element is fire. It's not air, air is a high vibration. And the wild beings are the air element. So yes, even Kabbalah agrees with what you're saying. So now remind me of your second question.
If we feel we've had someone put witchcraft on us, a curse, how does that get undone?
Great, thanks. There are three things that can happen. One is the evil eye, which usually is not that harmful. It doesn't feel bad. It's just like a bad vibration. And usually when you leave that person, you're going to be okay. Then there's the evil tongue, which we can't do very much about. Somebody can character assassinate you, which we can't do too much about, but we can do some spiritual things about it that won't affect what he said or she said about you. But that's a very terrible form of witchcraft. And it's very prevalent in what's going on today. But then there's the evil inclination. And the evil inclination is somebody who has a heart of envy, who really is jealous of you. And that's why there's a commandment: do not cover your neighbor or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Jealousy and a heart of envy is the cause of witchcraft. They don't want you to have what you've got, or they want to have what you've got. And it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about the evil eye, probably just anything will help you. Just avoid that person, be careful, watch your back, make sure they're not backstabbing you at work and trying to character assassinate you, take precautions and so on. The evil tongue and the evil inclination, once you've got an evil inclination and you start to work in that field, you're going to conscript dark forces to help you. You might even do it unknowingly, but you can do it knowingly. I remember once talking to an African tracker. I was walking in the bush with him to find plants. His wife was, at least his mother was a Sangoma, so he knew all the plants, and I was sort of getting his help to learn some of the plants in that area. And he said, anybody can become a witch. All they need to go is to go to another witch and buy a snake. And when I talk about a witch, I'm talking about the dark side of witchcraft, not Wicca. All they have to do is go to a witch and buy a snake, and then the snake will give them anything they want, which is talking about an evil spirit. You can have money, you can have wealth, you can have women, you can have anything that you want. But the problem is you have to pay your snake. You have to feed your snake. And if you don't feed your snake, it's going to eat your children, it'll eat your wife, it'll eat you. So in a sense, when you've got an evil inclination and you conscript dark forces to help you, and you knowingly do that, like I mentioned, the gangs do. I'm not sure Putin knows what I'm not sure that he's done it explicitly. He might. Hitler certainly knew about the occult, and I'm sure used it. They will help you, but then you've sold your soul. You have soul loss, and they're going to eat your karma away from you. And those kind of people usually end up in the lower realms, the hungry ghosts that have no chance of redemption whatsoever. So the answer to your question is probably the evil eye, not so bad, but it can be. For the other stuff, you probably need to see somebody who's expert in helping you with some kind of ritual or plant or talisman or something. For the evil eye, you could get a talisman to help you that may have power. If you have your own ancestral altar, you can ask your ancestors to help you. But, you might have to go to somebody who's expert in it and, some sort of shamanic has some sort of shamanic understanding. The interesting thing about the Buddhists and the yogis is that I'm sure they know about the dark forces, but they don't talk about them. They sometimes mention them, and they'll put out water for the hungry ghosts and all that kind of stuff. They say, work on your shadow, work on your ego. But that's not enough, because if you've got some knowledge of sacred elements, incense can repel negative forces, sacred music can repel, sacred chants can repel, spiritual practice can repel, talismans can repel. The dark forces don't like a high vibration. So anything with a high vibration, like lighting sage, is going to move them away. And, indigenous people know all of these principles and use them. So the combination of the yoga and the Buddhist stuff, work on your own shadow, your own ego for sure, but also be aware that something is out to get you, and take measures that you have, which you can do for yourself. But sometimes if it's heavy duty, you need to get help. It's a good question. All of them are good. Anything else? Yeah.
But I know some people that I think maybe wouldn't be so receptive to this kind of help, but it feels like they have darkness with them. How can I try to approach that?
I asked if they don't believe in any of this. I should just repeat the questions. If they don't believe in any of this, how can you approach them? You know, free will is the cosmic law. So to each his own. You can try, you know, and the people that I speak to that I know they're not going to believe what I say. Maybe they never will. Some of them just need a wake-up call. You know, I kind of got a wake-up call. I was very cynical about some of the stuff until I started to see things with a bushman, see things that from shamans in Peru that I couldn't explain. So that might do it for them if you can lead them into something. You know, now mind-altering plants have become very popular all over the world, especially in California. If they're prepared to do that, they may get an enlightening experience, but they're probably not because they're close to it. You have to be able to believe there's something else, and you know, you don't often get what you want there, and if you don't want that, you know, it's not going to happen. But sometimes that can be useful. Yeah.
David, you told me a story last week about a friend of yours, physicist, I think, who had maybe prostate cancer.
Yeah.
You took him to South Africa, skeptical of shamans and what they could do. Would you repeat that story? Because I think it was so powerful.
Yeah, good. We got time. Adrian, who's listening and knows the guy very well, he was a patient of mine. He was a physicist from Stanford, extremely bright guy, and I was taking care of his prostate cancer. Cancer, he had cancer removed. He'd gone to, I think, Stanford for some new therapy that didn't work, and he had a big, recurrent tumor in the bed of his pelvis between where the prostate was, between the bladder and the urethra, and he was totally incontinent. He wore a penile clamp, and I would go in every now and then to clean out stones, which he would get. He would get recurrent stones in that thing. And then he knew I was doing a trip to South Africa. I wasn't initiated at that stage, but I was doing a trip to visit different sangomas in the northern part of the country, all of which were very powerful. And they came along with me. We had quite a big group, and he was with them. And he said to me, Dave, I don't believe any of this nonsense, but I'm coming with you because I like you, you're my doctor, and I'm actually there to hold your feet to the fire. Sorry if there's sirens or drowning me out. Before you came, we had a helicopter. I couldn't even hear anybody talk. So he came along with me, and then we went to a couple of women who were powerful. The one was more supportive, but they often work in twos as a consensus. And I said, you know, Richard, you should have your bones read. And he said, okay. And then he went and he sat down. He was having a fantastic time just with the touring side of it and just watching what was going on. So something must have been gelling in him when he was seeing what the sangomas were doing. And the one woman, she chanted and she threw the bones and she looked at him. She couldn't speak English. We needed an interpreter. And she said to him, you have something down here eating you up like a crab. The crab is a sign for cancer. She doesn't know what cancer is. She probably can't read or write. And she said, you have no control over your water. And you're not long for this world unless you talk to your ancestors. So he kind of got a wake-up call and answered to Terry. You know, it was really a wake-up call because she read him like a book. You know, she had more information there than he could have got from any other doctor without computers and CAT scans and anything. In like just a few sentences, she nailed everything. So she gave him medicinal plants and rituals to do, and he came home and he did them. And he lived at least another 20 years, and he never got another stone that I had to take care of. And he lived out a good life. The other interesting thing that we talked to Sam about the other day is that he had a dream because he wanted to get a dog, and he went out to look for a dog, and he chose the dog. It was the best dog of the litter. And then after this trip, and before he went to collect the dog, the runt of the litter came to him in a dream. and said, don't choose him, don't choose my brother, choose me. And he listened to it. He said he would never have listened to it if not for the trip to South Africa and if not for the dream, that he believed the dream. It was the most amazing dog. I mean, he wouldn't go anywhere without this dog. I think it had a lot to do with his healing as well. And and he had other dreams later that he would tell me about. But I'm pretty sure that he would have lived forever. I think he just died of old age at the end of the day. You know, he broke his hip and other things happened to him. So he lived at least another 20 years. So thanks. I think that's a good thing to remind everybody. I don't think everybody in some of the audience know me well, but I'm not sure they've heard that story. All right, well, I've got 10 minutes left if there's anybody else. Somebody was unmuted, so maybe they wanted to say something. I think I've been muted again by Trevor.
I'm muted. I think Ilana and Cecil, yes. Give me Ilana.
Ilana, you want to say anything? Ilana, not there. Okay, good.
Alone.
The lady who threw the bones,
Yeah.
who sort of diagnosed that gentleman.
Yeah.
Does she take Medicare?
Yes, she takes Medicare. Yeah, all you do is you go there and you put like 200 Rand under the mat. She doesn't know who you are, and she just throws the bones. And then if you don't like the reading, you take your money back. How's that for a good deal? And the interesting thing is people in South Africa, you know, for them it's expensive because some guys, it'll be a month's wage for them, but they'll go there, they won't question. Here I have folks who come to my bones and they, you know, they often wonder about the cost of it. You know, should I really be spending this much money with this thing? Yeah, you had a question.
I did it's more a global question, but it is also specific to the Kalahari people. With the world changing, with the cultures being, I was going to say dying, the cultures, but and the elders are passing. Is the knowledge still maintained? Is there a younger group of apprentices or whatever? And my experience is more, pardon me, from Australia and their Aboriginals. It's very similar to our native indigenous here in this country, and I suspect the world over. What are your thoughts?
That's a good question. It is now that all the old knowledge that is going away, is that a problem? I think it is a problem because sometimes people make it up as they go along. You know, the New Age, especially, you know, the New Age spirituality sort of made things up and they weren't necessarily true. That was why I went back to my roots in the Kalahari first with the Bushmen and then to the Sangomas, because I knew this is the original medicine. It's been there since the beginning of time. And if I could see it there, then I knew it was real. It was also real in Peru, but there it's a different mindset because people use mind-altering plants, and I didn't want to do that. In South Africa, they just use drumming and chanting and dancing to get into those states. So I think your concerns are real because I think we'll find a way if we can tap back into all the ancient knowledge, because it's all there in a sense. You know, we don't have to have the magic in order to get to we don't have to be able to have our foot in the fire in order to get to the triad of the tree of becoming. So I think if you want us to follow devoutly any Buddhist tradition, any Sufi tradition, any Christian mystical tradition, any yoga tradition, the Buddhists are the most accessible and they're very clear on their teachings. But you can learn the teachings, but then you've got to be careful of the teacher. You know, so that's like I say, just be careful of the teacher. Take you want and leave the rest behind. But I think it'll be okay because our habitat's disappearing. I was lucky because the Bushmen have changed, as you know, the Aboriginals and the Native Americans. The interesting thing about apartheid is it protected the people. because it actually drove them into their rituals. That was all that they had left. And when the Afrikaner government took over Namibia, they put aside Bushman land for the Bushmen so they could hunt and gather. So there were some aspects of what they did. The intentions weren't necessarily good, but I don't think the Africans were as compromised by apartheid as maybe some of the other indigenous people have been compromised. There was no genocide. There might have been political killings and stuff when they started to want independence, not condoning what they did. But I get a sense that it wasn't, now the African traditions were stronger than ever when apartheid was around. They all went to their healers. So, your employee would come to you, this was common, I'm going home, my mother's sick. And they go home. And that's not why their mother's sick, because they want to be polite to their white boss. And they would have gone to a Sangoma, and the Sangoma will say, no, your employer is cheating you. He's not giving you enough money, and he's not treating you well. You must go home, find another one. And they would leave, but they would never tell you, They would never say, you need to treat me better because I went to this man, he threw bones and he says you're not nice. So they just give you an excuse, and then they go and move, get another employer. So that was alive and well when I was growing up. I just didn't know it was there. I did to some extent because we had a guy who was a Sangoma in our house for a while. And I knew he was a Sangoma, but he was wonderful to me. He was just an incredible guy. So, it's worrisome, but I think if you can just stick to the original truths that are all over and they all have them, then you don't have to worry. But maybe you won't be as adept at facing serious witchcraft, but maybe there'll be people enough who know, who've been told by their ancestors what to do, because lots of people now are just getting the information anyway, and that's okay. Maybe the Aboriginals are too. Maybe some of the white Australians are getting it, the ones with the right intention. Interesting thing is, my teacher said to me, it doesn't matter what your color is, if you're white or you're black or anything, you get initiated if you're called. And, he acknowledged it. Now white people were being called. And that's what's happening. It's like, I was a black person in past lives. Now in fact, white skin makes no difference, So I think there's hope, because if you can channel the original information and not be tempted by the wheel of samsara, there's being in a sentient body and all those attractions, and you can hold to the truth, I think we'll be fine. And I think we're going to come right, but they better start soon, because climate change is what's going to take us out at the moment. Yeah.
David, you didn't mention anything about indigenous North American healers.
Yeah.
I remember visiting the Hopi Mesa once many years ago, and the magic that goes on up there.
Yeah, it's like you said, they all have the knowledge, all indigenous, whether they're shamans in the Americas, South and North America. They do the same thing. They're no different. They might use different techniques, like they don't use bones, but they may do a sand painting or something like that. They trance, they do all sorts of things. So yeah, they have all the knowledge. The problem with the Native Americans is they've been so compromised that very few of the real ones want to have anything to do with white people. Because they're saying, you've stolen our land, now you want to steal our spirit.
Right.
And, there are white people who are doing vision quests now according to a Native American tradition, and they don't like that at all. And peyote has been harvested, not peyote, but peyote has been harvested by white people for using for spiritual transformation. And they say, no, this belongs to us. So I'm not saying that's right, but it has to be done in a respectful way with, some, and then I think they're just too angry, so that it's unlikely. I mean, I looked into some of those traditions. Some woman who was a Sangoma, a white woman, said to me once, yes, they're giving you these readings, but it doesn't mean you must do what we do. You can find a Native American. Very hard to find one, who's going to want to take care of a white person. which is our fault, it's because of what we've done. The Aborigines maybe probably the
Very
same.
much so, very much
Yeah,
so.
at the back.
I just am so happy to be here and so impressed with everything you're talking about. I guess for me, I did spend some time with the nomadic tribes and with the Samburu and various Rendile and in East Africa and saw that trance state through breathing and dancing. What really was kind of more knowledgeable for me in Egypt was the Zakir, with getting rid of the evil eye. And I found with the music and the women in ecstatic dance, afterwards, they were fine. I thought, look at all the money we spend on psychotherapy here. And they were just fine. The eye was gone. The black was gone. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if you could hear that, but about her experiences in East Africa with similar things. And I think the important thing that you're saying, they do things in community. So in answer to that other lady who asked a question about the evil eye, she said that everything that was evil eye or anything like that was dissipated. And there's no question that the Native Americans and the Africans and it's usually done in community. And there's singing and there's dancing and there's ritual, and there might be ritual plans that have been done, kind of like the Native American sweat lodge. There's a lot of stuff going on that can be incredibly cleansing in that moment. But then the other part comes in later. It's intention, attention to detail, action, affirmation. That's where people slip up. It's like, okay, I'm done now and I'm fine, but no, you have to keep it up. You have to find it, keep going to those rituals or do whatever you have to do, or get medicinal plants or something to continue with, because they come back. And so in a sense, it's not psychotherapy, but it's like taking your antibiotics. You take your course, and then maybe you take a mini dose every month or so, just to make sure it stays away. The affirmation is really key. I get quite a lot of folks who come and I say, you've got a shade over you. This grandfather on your father's side is bothering you. He needs forgiveness. And they say, oh, I went to a psychic and they got rid of it for me. I said, well, they didn't get rid of it. So it's still there. The reason is not, you have to go through those intention, action, affirmation. All those things are really vitally important. They're critical to the maintenance of it. Yeah.
Do you think that's more of an American trait? Because our culture is always looking for a magic silver bullet, boom, and then they're not willing to continue to do the work, whatever the work is.
It's true. I want a quick fix.
Yeah.
A quick fix. And, they're often enchanted with the bones, but they don't do the rituals. And I've had another guy who, he was so enamored with the bones. This is wonderful. It was about his father who he needed to forgive. And then he said, the bones were amazing. He came back 6 months later. And I said, well, so pleased that you liked them, but your father's still there. And I said, did you do the rituals? And he said, no, I just talked it out, because he couldn't take that leap of faith. So it's not going to work. So it requires the belief, and it requires the maintenance, maintain, sustain thing.
Christine has a question. I don't know.
Let me take Christine. What, Christine?
On the tree that you showed, at the very top on the left, there's a little, looks like a sword. What is
Can you
that?
speak up a bit?
On the tree at the very top on the left, there's something that looks like a sword, a little sword. What is that?
Those are magical symbols in Kabbalah that I don't really understand. It's an original drawing that I superimposed my stuff on. So it's got some mystical thing that I don't know what it means, quite honestly.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
What's your opinion about Reiki as a source of healing, if it's done distance or in person?
Reiki is a force, whether it's distant or in person, powerful stuff, because you're invoking the field. You don't need to touch anybody. You can do it without touching. You don't have to be in the same room. It's coming from just like I do phone bones. Person doesn't have to be there. They can be in New York. It's going to be the same. So the same is true with Reiki, is that healing touch is nice because people want that feeling. So that, you know, somebody who does Qigong or something on you and you feel, you know, it's like the placebo effect plus the distant healing. But when you're powerful and the person's receptive, you don't need the touch. You know, Reiki is great. Great stuff. It's good though, if you're a Reiki specialist, to talk to your ancestors so they can make it stronger. And then when you do your Reiki, if I don't know anybody here doing Reiki, or is you open up sacred space, light a candle, light sage, invite your ancestors in to help you, and you might be surprised at what happens. You get more help because you're a bit limited unless you're asked to receive. Okay, everybody. Well, thanks. We've gone over a bit, but that's great. And next one, I think, is in September. It's on fear and love, because we're sort of on this trajectory of the tree of life, the left and the right. We haven't talked enough about fear. So the one in September will be about fear and love. It'll be in this room again. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8 people today, like we had last time. It's great here because we've got room, the HEPA filters on, the windows are open, the doors are open. Everybody's vaccinated, so it's quite safe. But I think that probably as we get more people and they get closer together, because the virus is kind of escalating a bit, we'll probably go back to the shot center, which has got more room. The only disadvantage of the shot center, like last time you probably saw, is you can't see the folks in the audience, the ones that are on Zoom, but the guys on in the audience can see you because it's on just a little bit. But apparently I got feedback and nobody thought that made too much difference. So we're hoping that things slowly get better. I think what's happening now is everybody's in survival mode, so that they're not attending to their needs, they're attending to their wants. So the actual attendance has dropped off significantly. And I think people have forgotten about school for extended learning and all this amazing stuff that they have here. But I think it's going to grow back slowly, and I'm grateful for the technology that we can do this. So have a great weekend. It's going to be hot here. I don't know what it's like where you guys are. And thanks for coming.